is a veteran of the Folkestone Conference of 10 years ago, is, I think, a Viennese. I'll get this wrong, I'm sure. Is professor of architecture at Dusseldorf, but I guess is known for certain works that jump to mind immediately. The strange manned locked aircraft carrier, the magnificent shops, the candle shop and so on in Vienna, the beautiful media line in Munich and so on. He, for me, is part of that amazing Viennese tradition of Loos and so on. If you've ever seen Loos's American bar, you can understand the candle shop, I think. But he also is a nutty guy. Anybody that puts aircraft carriers on land, that confuses Bannon completely because he's not sure whether it's a megastructure or not. I don't think I'll go on anymore, otherwise I'll forget what I'm saying. Hans Hollein.
Because this is the, what do you call it in English, centenary celebration of, after all these bicentennials, you'll get mixed up. The centenary celebration of the Folkestone Conference, I thought that I sort of reflect a little on the works. Actually, originally I thought I even give part of my lecture, I give the same lecture I gave at Folkestone. But the problem is that I never write down lectures, and I only had some sort of notes with the most important items, and it would have been difficult. Because I thought it would be interesting to see what sort of is still valuable and in keeping with our time or not, what has been said in Folkestone. It was a very funny scene at that time in Folkestone because, and I think it was a very fermenting, a very good scene in which many things happened. It was a strange kind of enthusiasm, also a great belief in certain aspects of new technology. Everybody who was waving a silver vinyl sheet was sort of applauded. And if something was out of wood or smacked a little of nature, it was deeply disregarded. It had to be inflated, or it had to be out of fiberglass. I had at that time, we all were sort of at the time, I would say, in the business of creating evocative images. This was really a time where it was very necessary to try with one single image really to convey a basic idea. And Ron has just, for instance, mentioned my aircraft carrier, which I would put into that category, which were things along, of course, with the archigram's work, which was is a very typical example of that, which were things where, in with one instance, you got a whole series of associations and analogies to things, which you then sort of could make a fuller picture out, and which would generate certain thought processes in you. I have decided to start with some projects here which are based on concepts. At that time I gave a lecture of about 2 hours. Today it will be almost 2 hours maybe. which were based on some of the concepts I showed at Folkestone, and sort of want to show what in more sort of down-to-earth terms in the steps of trying to realize at least certain aspects of what has been shown there as a basic thought, as a basic concept, as a basic image, to show how it developed, how this developed, what were the projects then after this, and what were the realizations. Now, I start with with a concept or a project on concepts based on certain ideas which were very much rejected at that time in Folkestone. Maybe we can start with the slides, because I think it might be quite interesting to see what sort of was considered rather not negative, but maybe irrelevant or what have you. This is a concept of a city I made in 1959 in the United States, which was based on the idea that you have spaces rather sort of amorphous, which rather than you create spaces around certain functions you stipulate, you create spaces which you then discover and find uses for, and you for the varieties of your daily routine, of your daily life, you try to find the specific areas, the specific spaces you like. And this is what I call a city you could live in and live on. Top is an umbrella for the sun. You could find places which were sort of theatrically shaped, and you could have performances, you could have areas of isolation, you had even chambers of weightlessness and love coves and things like that. Of course, this is somewhat also influenced by the concept of the American Indian pueblos, on which at that time I did a big study on. This concept of this sort of womb-like environment and the concept of the use of the surface of the building continued in a number of projects. And this is here one sort of basic conceptual project in which I tried to show the possibility, again a little influenced by the pueblos, of the use of the surface of a building. You can have plants and greenery on it. You can have waterfalls and creeks running down the surface. Now, this was a project which I showed 1966 in Folkestone, which was for the for a savings bank in Vienna, which was directly based on this idea that you have use of the surface of a building, that you give the surface, the use of the surface to the population, and the use of the surface of the building is different than, for instance, the inside. The building not as a barrier, and especially like with a bank, which only is open for a few hours a day, and then you are standing in front of closed doors and show windows which advertise some credit you can take from the bank. You make use of the building. Of course, there are a number of problems which such a concept of first the legal problems, that you have different uses on the same ground, liability problems. It's all what you hear when you come with such a project. And of course also certain financial problems, because some of this concept, of course, cost more than just sort of a simple enclosed space. Now, for instance, here at this project, the idea of financing this was a piece, a lot left out in a row of houses, and for some very strange reason then zoned as green space, but walled off from the street and not open to the public. So the idea was that you give this space back to the public, that you get that the bank gets a lot free, a building lot for free practically, and so the money which they were otherwise would have spent to buy the site would go into as an addition into the construction cost. This is I don't show any other slides of that, but this is a project on which I worked for about 2.5 years. We did it down practically to the working drawings. The bank is the bank of the savings bank of the city of Vienna. The city of Vienna is a socialist city, and at a certain point, the bankers became more bankers than sort of city people, and said, well, let's do a big hall anyway, in which we can then later maybe can put additional floors in or on. At that time I stepped down from this commission. So this was not built. Other projects in the area of this uses what I call the walk-on buildings is, for instance, here a project for an experimental theater for Washington University in St. Louis, not built. I taught for a year at Washington U in St. Louis in 1963, and this was a sketch for the Austrian embassy in Brasilia. Here, just I run very briefly through this. The basic idea is clear. Here, a student's, I'll call it that, dormitory and student center, a competition entry in which I won a prize, but it was not executed. And here, as a juxtaposition, the question of the use of surfaces. This was a project I did for Copenhagen, where, of course, you go to the extreme and you have you can walk on the whole Copenhagen above the buildings. Here, another project which incorporates, among others, this idea, which is again a competition, for which I won first prize, and we are supposed to construct. It's an ecumenical church in the Austrian Alps on about 1,800 meters, that's about 5,000 feet elevation, an area where there is about half of the year snow and winter, and there's a lake which is again frozen about half of the year. and it's in a very beautiful landscape. So here the aspect, of course, not so much of the use of the surface. You have enough surfaces to walk on, but rather sort of the blending into the environment is in the foreground. Here you see a model picture. Even the clock tower has been turned horizontal, that you don't have any big protruding item. You make a sort of a meditation walk. You have the bell above the level of the lake, and it acts as a sound reflection. It's a very small building. Now, another project on which I've been working for the last 4 to 5 years, on which we start construction right now, and which very much incorporates this idea and some other aspects of this concept I have been talking about, is the project for the museum in the German town of Mönchengladbach, which is near the Dutch border, and to you may be known as for its famous soccer team. And we just had a few months ago the big decision whether this museum should be built or the stadium should be enlarged for the size of 100,000 people. And strangely enough, the museum won. There were big rallies in the city and the pedestrian area. The models were shown, and it was forwarded to the population for decision, and they decided that they decided in this case for how shall I say, culture. So this project, and on this I want to dwell a little longer, incorporates a number of problems I've been dealing with in the last 10 years after Folkestone. The one is this only simple aspect, of course, of the use of the surface of buildings, the walk-on building. The other is the integration, the incorporation, the intervention into the old fabric of a city. At Folkestone, and when I looked up the notes, I had a note which said a city building is actually continuous transformation, and this is a very good example of how to build in the problems of building in an old environment, an environment where you have Romanesque and Gothic remnants, Baroque remnants, a city which was heavily bombed during the war, still luckily have areas with green, and here you see a model of some of the old parts, so interspersed with new buildings. The whole thing is on a hill. It's the only hill in the landscape. Otherwise, it's a flat country, like you imagine, of course, Dutch landscapes. And it's the end of an ice age moraine. And this hill, so it always had a certain importance. It was already in Roman times a ritual area, a temple, and of course later on churches, monasteries, etc., which are no longer in use. The churches, yes, but monasteries, not after Napoleon, had been closed. So the integration of not only a museum, but of a whole area which is for all kinds of educational activities, an adult educational facility, a music school, and a music hall, interspersed with housing, a library, an archive, etc. This here you see the area. We did first at the beginning of our project. We did the planning, an urban scheme for this whole area of this hill. This is the existing sort of main street. It's a pedestrian area now, and we tried to tie in the future educational center into these activities, because right now it's a rather dead area. So we also tried to tie it in terms of levels. So really you end up on top of the buildings, and for instance also the entrance to the museum is on top of the building, rather on the side. So I don't go into the details of all this planning concept here, and just show very briefly the diagrams. And this is here then the museum. You have here the main street, the main pedestrian area, and which is tied in here on the same level. You have a bridge. You land on top of this buildings, and some of these other buildings protrude. Here you see it very clearly in the section. It was also very important to leave some of the dominating features of this cityscape intact. And here we are now, the first building of this educational center is the museum, and here we are at the museum building. Here it is more in detail. Again, the hatched area is the pedestrian area, which then later extends into the other areas of the educational center. Here you have a schematic section which explains itself. You pass through. Here you have the center. You pass through. You are on this bridge. You have a view over the city, and then you have a little temple, sort of as a symbol for the museum. And you enter the museum, which then again splits into 3 levels and has also daylight areas. Or you walk down on the building. In the summer you can enter from several levels and into these green areas. Is this in focus? Or? This, just for those who are interested in art, is an indication of the collection. It's which the whole project was based on 2 legs, really. One leg was the urban situation, which I just briefly explained, and maybe go into in some aspects more. The other was the collection and the structuring of the collection. And we had the good luck of working together with the director of the museum for several months to evolve with the program, because the original program said just such and such number of square feet of collection area. The collection consists mostly of 20th century art, and in this 20th century area again, mostly art of the last 20 years, with a heavy emphasis on good collections on specific artists, where you have always, like, you have 25 Oldenburgs, so you have 10 Kleins, or you have 12 Roscoes, or you have, I don't know, 15 Tapiers and 10 Judds. So you always have a very good image of one. It's not just one example, but you can show very representatively an artist or boys. You have a whole number of pieces. And then, of course, you have more other areas where you have only a few examples, and we try to come up with a kind of matrix-like situation in which you, rather than to follow a given path, you could walk through and see the connection between Oldenburg, Liechtenstein, Duchamp, and Man Ray, for instance, if you want. Or you go in another direction and see what is new concrete art and nouveau realism to boys, or how is Bruce Nauman and Kane and Charlton and Agnes Martin or whoever. You can sort of take different passes, or you can only look at white pictures, for instance, if you want. So you see the aspects, for instance, of white in art, things like that. Out of this and the urban situation, this concept, this basic concept, we arrived at this basic concept, which sort of the more flexible, the more less individual parts of the collection are in this kind of pool, and from this, in this cloverleaf fashion, you can enter at strategic points into the more isolated rooms. You have, which you can easily read here, of course, other. This is true for. This is a superimposition, really, of floors. You have children's painting classes in the cafeteria and temporary exhibitions, lecture rooms, and workshops, etc. And you have a possibility of mixing indoor and outdoor activities. Here you see the thing in an isometric. This is the area of the daylight rooms. This is the administration tower and artists' apartments. Then for the staff and for the watchmen, the spaces where they have dining rooms, etc. And here the temporary collection. Here the entrance, and here the possibility to walk down or even go down with a wheelchair or a baby carriage. These are parts of the old city walls, here and here, and we took up the motive and the material of this old city walls. This gives you a better idea. You have this platform here. Here will be the future connection you saw on the isometric with the other parts of the cultural center. Here again this entrance. Here you see it from the other side. Here you have a media line like thing which you will see in some minutes later. The media line concepts are on mentioned. And these are simple industrial like objects with faced with corrugated metal and asbestos cement. This is a stone block which is slightly eroded, and the erosion is the window area. This is the temporary exhibition, and oh, just the wrong button. I very briefly go through this, but it gives you a better idea. This is a view from the top. Now I've taken off the skylights, and you see into the larger singular rooms. You always have the corresponding plan here, and you have double-story high rooms for very big paintings. You see here, for instance, Morris sculptures, or the Rothkos and the Kleins. With the floor below, you have gotten into this pavilion, come down here. You have here a sort of strategic point from which you have a landing slightly above the floor level, from which you can go into the temporary exhibition, which you also can even enter by car from the outside. You can go into the gallery, which then extends to the future buildings here. You can look 60 meters diagonally through the collection and just get a first glimpse of what you know. You see always also these stairs which lead up to the upper floors. This sort of squeezed in both into the collection area and protruding into the garden, the cafeteria. And the floor below, here you see it now, for instance, as an example, filled up with these temporary walls, which you can put in, is the lower floor, which in system is really the same, but you always have this sort of avenues of view, that you always know where you are. You also have, for instance, different forms of shapes of stairs that your memory tells you that you have been here or you haven't been here, because you want to, we do not want this linear flow, but on the other hand, you do not want to miss parts of the collection. And here you can sort of have the connection with the outside. Here's the children's painting area and the children's play area outside. Here's underneath here a big lecture room and a smaller lecture room here. And again, some of the larger singular spaces. Here you see elevations and sections. I take you now to a very brief walk on the surface of this building. You arrive from the pedestrian area. You see from there, and also from other areas, you see whatever announcement posters, etc. You can climb on this building from different sides. You come on this platform. You have objects of art here, but you also have, and this is a very important thing, it's a city where you do not have, like in a big city like London or New York, a museum, a trained museum going public. So you have to induce people to go into the museum. You have to relieve their sort of hesitance to go into the museum because they think there are sort of things of high art going on to which they don't belong. So both activity on the outside but also view into the museum from this pedestrian area is important. Yeah? And you see that normal people move up and down the stairs, and you see that what is exhibited there. Or you also can just look at the view. You can have a lesson in Gothic architecture sort of directly from the museum. Here you see this entrance pavilion. Here you see how you walk down these terraces, and again can look in, and in the summer even enter. You see that again what activities here from the outside, or in the evening you get an idea. And then you are down in the garden and just look back at the building. And from the inside, as I told you, from this landing, you always see the beginning of a stair, so you have an information about whether it is going up or down. You have daylight coming through light wells coming through, and you have, for instance, here, Bob Morris sculptures. You can walk up, you can look down on things. You have here, for instance, the cafeteria sticking in. You have here, for instance, big canvases like Bryce Martin or 4x4 meter objects. And you have always, even though it's a south exposure, which was very difficult to handle, we always wanted to have the relation with the outside, that you see nature, that you know what the change of the day and the weather is. So you always have possibilities to look outside, or you have possibilities to observe the whole area. You know here is something going on still. That was important, and it's where you walk down into this central distribution point where you go to the singular rooms. And well, here you see the connection with the outside terraces or one of these interior things. Here I have some simulations of the interiors with the paintings, and I might here talk very briefly about just a method too in terms of approaching, not the method of designing, but the method of approaching a public. We talk today so much about participation in planning, and what we do is we put people in front of people a plan, a drawing which they cannot read, which for them is as unrecognizable as for me, for instance, a musical score. And they are then supposed to decide on whether they like it or not, or whether this is sufficient for them. And we tried to develop a method of simulation that you, in the design process, can continue have a confrontation with laymen also, with people participating in the decision process, just to imagine how will this really look, how will the spaces really be, how will the atmosphere be, and we try this in this case and in other cases, sort of have a continuous information going on, and also a valuable feedback. At the same time, we of course study certain things here like lighting, etc. I go directly after I make, for instance, the preliminary design into very big models. Therefore, some of these things are rather crude because you don't know the detailing yet, but you want to give already the impression of the space. So out of this big scale, we go back then into the small scale and into the detailing. And this shows you, for instance, studies on the lighting, etc. And especially important also, maybe not so much in the museum, but in other spaces, what is the mood, what is the atmosphere of such a thing, and that you know it while you are designing. Now, very briefly here, just because this was a museum, and we are here in London, and Jim Sterling participated in the same competition. This is my project for the Düsseldorf Museum of Art, for the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen. You might know Jim's project. That is my solution, which is very different from Jim's, because I took up the low, old, these are buildings, a few left after bombings of the 17th and even 16th century, and I took up this cornice height and made this part of the block on that level. I took up the high cornice height of the early 20th century buildings and the 1950 buildings on this side, and I tried to resolve this conflict here. There was a very high class, not a classicist, but a building in kind of classicism of the early 20s, and a Baroque church, very sort of sculptural and small in scale. And I tried to have this sort of diagonal relationship with the small scale and the big objects here. And this shows you here the system that at two levels here, which we took up, and the ramp is at the same time the main entrance, and you can walk, you have a pedestrian walk through here, and you can sort of integrate public movement and the museum, and we tried to make as much as possible on one floor and not on many floors. Here the plans of the lower floor with some of the parking here, and the entrance level with temporary exhibition and other collection areas. Again, in a museum and an intervention into an old fabric of a city is the proposal for part of the Museum of Modern Art in Florence. You maybe know Richard Meyer's project, who does also projected a part there. And this is Florence, this is the Arno, here is San Miniato, Fate Belvedere, that's the next hill, and on this hill is the Villa Strozzi, and the Villa Strozzi has a villa proper and an orangery and stables. These are the stables and carriage houses, and these are partly used and partly extended to form a museum of art. It's very important, the location of this thing. I go back to this slide, because the Florence you really know, and most of the tourists know, is really this Florence. The Duomo and the Signoria and the Palazzo Pitti, and they rarely ever come there. And the real Florence, and it's very telling, this map, because the real Florence is here. About 70% of the population live here. Here are the working class quarters. But you rarely, if you don't just happen to take a drive down there, as a tourist you never come there. So this will be an important link, and also this will be the closest cultural institution for this area here. And it also, the city has bought this palace grounds, and the gardens are open to the public. Here you see the basic system of that you leave certain parts which are protected by as monuments by the Soprintendenza dei Monumenti, and then other parts are just added to as new structures. Richard used practically completely independently. I must say we worked only sort of one coordinative meeting. I used very much the same system. Here you see the plans, lower floor plan. I kept this little piazza, and we made the entrances to the small doors. Here's the big sculpture hall, here an auditorium, painting hall, video rooms above, and a gallery, a balcony above this painting gallery. This is Richard Meyer's object. And it's on the hill. The stables are strangely enough on the hill. They have been built on the hill because the villa was not supposed to be on the hill, because the Strozzis were there in kind of exile, and they were not supposed to look back on Florence. So the villa is on the lower part and is dealt by Scarpa and Gardella. So you see here this old facades with very prominent trees and light openings here, and well, it's just in front of the entrance door. And here you see the sculpture hall with the balcony and the auditorium. This sort of one run through on one aspect of some proposals made at Foxton. Another one was the concept of environment really not only created by building but created by other media, and sort of as an extreme concept I once proposed the architecture pill, the environmental control kit, where you had pills which you could take and create yourself various environmental situations you just wanted to have. We also did this as a spray, and together with Peter Növer, we even tried to sort of make a product out of it, but we got in conflict with the Austrian drug laws. Then it was just used as a sort of advertising thing with very little sort of dangerous ingredients in it. But important was sort of the stimulation of the idea that your environment is not created only by buildings but by other media, that today you do no longer, for instance, ask the architect to do strategic work in terms of, like Michelangelo did, fortifications, etc. Today you wouldn't dream of asking an architect to design your guns or something, or you don't ask an architect to make astronomical instruments as you did in Jaipur. And on the other hand, so certain areas are taken out of the hand of the architect, other media come into the hand of the architect. And the determination of our environment with other, what I call non-physical means, I think is, and Friedrich St. Florian, for instance, touched on one aspect of this today, is an important thing. And this is part of this. Now, reality and the possibility of realization, of course, makes it that we are still many steps away from such possibilities. But in my work, I still try to come with at least some aspects of this into it, and show and try to incorporate some of these aspects, which we'll see right away. Now, this is when I would briefly determine what architecture is. and I don't want to go into that now, don't worry. But just briefly, I would say on the one side it is preservation of body temperature. And that you have, for instance, seen just in the slides before. You can also take a pill to preserve your body temperature, for instance, or you can wrap yourself in something. The other is a more different one. It's what I would say the sacred aspect of architecture, the ritual aspect. When primitive man starts to build, he either builds for shelter or he builds for cultic reasons. And the sort of the sign, the signal function of architecture, the ritual function, the semiotic function is an important aspect. And this I have, for instance, just shown this, of course, a number of overlays here with a Rolls-Royce grill on Wall Street, or with an ore wagon here. Just sort of two evocative images, and sort of back to Fox 66. This was what I did at that time, and it ties right into the semiotic aspect and the signal aspect. This is a candle shop in Vienna, a very small thing, about 14 square feet, about 14 square meters, about 140 square feet. It's a building very small, as you recognize from these figures, and in the main shopping district in Vienna. So the idea was for me to, how can I enlarge this space by both real and imaginary means, or psychological means. The first thing was to make the entrance very narrow and long, that you are sort of squeezed together, and then once you're squeezed through here, you feel a kind of relief. So the small space feels bigger. This is oversimplification, but I have to be short. Then you suddenly end up in an intersection of axes where you have one glimpse into the indefinite, and where you have you are confronted with what you get there, which are candles, and then you enter the storage where you can pick the candles you want. And from the outside, I closed the shop as much as possible because I thought, you get the message once you see one candle or two, but you get candles there and you don't have to show 100 candles. So you see, and the showcases are turned towards the sidewalk, because only the one who walks on this sidewalk can really see it. This is a view from the other side of the street, from the other sidewalk, and there the interior lighting is used as a kind of common as the lighting. There's no outside neon signs or anything. This is the air conditioning, which is clearly expressed. The whole thing is done out of 2 millimeter aluminum, anodized, glued with epoxy resin. It's an idea I got from reading about British aircraft construction. What is this? No? So here you have the interior, just a very quick look. Here you see, for instance, the imaginary architecture. You extend the space by mirrors, and you do it in such a way that the complete image only is it is composed out of the real and the imaginary. All details are made like this, and even, for instance, the cylinder here, and changed around, can be extended and changed around, and you just put into these panels, and you have this element or that element, or you have a changing booth or whatever it is, and you can flip things around on this basic grid here. So the important thing is this, and out from this module, everything can extend outwards or inwards. This shows you detail. This shows you how the problem has been solved. How to not to bump into an incoming person. And that's a shop 8 or 7 years after the candle shop 3 years ago. Again here, sort of the semiotic aspect has been very strong. It's a jewelry store, and the whole design of the shop should sort of carry this simplest message. So you did not want to write jewelry or something, but now there's always a problem that these things, it looks very costly. It is also not cheap, but you're laughing. But anyway, still you have, like here, it is in a sort of the main shopping district in Vienna. But the condition was that the shop costs as much as any other shop in that area would, on that level, would cost. But I always try to incorporate necessary features. Like here, this is again the air conditioning. This are the exhausts, and these counters here are the intakes. So this is not merely a sort of freely designed object, but it also serves a purpose, and it of course provokes a lot of associations. In this case, this is Baltic granite and 3 types of brass. And that's how it looks from the inside. The stepped down ceiling. Again, it's a very small store. It's again only about 12.8 square meters. It's a very condensed thing. In such a condensed thing, you have to be very careful about every detail, because every detail is at arm's length, or you see it. It's not like in a big building, like where you have something 50 yards away from you. So you have to be very careful about all this detailing. That at least was my goal here. Now, I just ran through it. Some of these examples are just one sort of little sign or signal is used. That's a building in New York on 79th Street, the Richard Feigen Gallery, published by Monica. And here, this is the entrance to the 2-story gallery. There's a 3rd story below in the basement. The upper floors are for living quarters. This pillar here is transformed into this column, which is really a kinetic object, which you can see on this photograph. It would be a movie. You would see continually things moving here, because cars move by, people move by, and you have a constant change here. Also, you could write sort of anamorphic signs here, obscene symbols which then suddenly show up, or whatever pleases you. And that's the interior. I go very briefly through it. I only want to point one thing out. Well, this is a two-story space. You can, for big paintings here, you see the water lilies of Monet, for instance, hanging. They have these viewing balconies. And you have here a forerunner of the medial line, which you will see in a moment. This is a kind of line, at that time I called it medial spine, on which you have light, you can attach, of course, the spotlights and projectors, you can attach speakers, you have the ultrasound system, etc. Well, this is just some examples, like this is a bathroom, this I always, if I do such a thing, I try to make sort of prototypes of something which later can have wider consequences. This is a viewing room where you can sort of sit in a cozy corner and view more leisurely and more isolated pictures. Now again, like here, the semiotic and the semantic sort of aspect meet, and the letters also become the facade, and this leads back also to this image of the aircraft carrier, which I will not help Rainer Benham to interpret. Now, 1971, there was a competition for the artistic enhancement of the Olympic Village. Cedric Price was also one of the invited ones. And this is the, at that time already almost existing Olympic Village. And I was invited as an artist rather than an architect. These are very strange distinctions, but at some time it helps, because especially at this project, we could always, when there were difficulties, fall back with codes and building department, we could always fall back on the argumentation that it is an object of art, and there are little rules for objects of art and many rules for buildings. So my suggestion was not to make a singular sculpture or a fountain or what have you somewhere, or here it's specifically at this forum area, but to provide a system of lines which should run through the whole Olympic Village and which should give you an environmental conditioning in various ways, which you will see in a minute. And this scheme got the first prize. And because it also solved problems of lighting and orientation, besides its artistic aspect, we were able to use parts of this budget for lighting and orientation, and therefore we were able to carry out about a mile of this line. Oh, what's that? Sorry. So, this gives you a brief idea of what this is. These are simple elements like a toy railroad track which you can put together in 3 dimensions in various combinations. The whole thing had to be brought to the site and assembled. It was even painted in the factory and only attached to the floor. It had to also take up all the tolerances. The strange fact was that the so-called level pedestrian areas here had about they had inaccuracies of half a meter, which is quite extraordinary for modern construction. But this is when you build fast for the Olympic Village, for the Olympic Games, and it was done very hastily. You have these lines which everywhere carry lights, and they agglomerate, as you for instance see here, agglomerate at certain areas which are more important areas, and you from these areas by color-coded lines you come into different other areas or to other sub-centers of this village. Okay, beautiful. Now it's upside down. Don't worry. Let's take it like this. You have to use your imagination. You see it anyway. You see it anyway also in the slides. So you have these linear lights, which are high voltage lines of 980 volt. And you have, of course, you can plug in at various points spotlights. You can plug in at sort of every second meter. You can plug in either a spotlight or a speaker or a television monitor. You see here you can have heating, infrared heating at certain areas where you need it. You can have cooling for certain areas at certain days. You have orientation on the thread of ARTNET principle. You have projectors. And this is, the idea was more not for the Olympic use, but for the after-Olympic use. And this is for the sort of different groups of the population. They can, so that if they have a rally, for instance, they can get in one of the sub-centers together. They take up a central storage to take out a monitor, a speaker, what have you. You can have running information panels. You can pull together very quickly an exhibition, for instance, or for a political rally, a poster or something. You have certain areas with water, both because water is a pleasant thing and also has a cooling effect. You have sunshades, you have roll-down walls, you have roofs which you can put on and off. You have floor heating, you can have children play things, etc. Now you see here, for instance, here you see the light strip, the plug-in point, the rail for this information panel. You have here the thing which, the head which takes up the tolerances. Well, here, yeah. This is an earlier one, but it doesn't matter. Here you see a view during the day which was complementing the night view you saw on the other side. This was complementing the exploded isometric where you saw the different components. And here you see how they are just put together. Well, it doesn't move. But here again, you leave it for a moment. You can see, for instance, here the roofs, the sunshades, you will see in a minute they roll down. Here you see it on a section. Well, now then let's go. Well, this was wrong now. I'm getting confused too. Well, this is a comfort diagram, and I show you, I don't know if I can show you the 4 relevant examples, but you have 2 relevant examples. This shows a comfort diagram and shows the condition on January, in January at 2 o'clock with figures for a number of 40 years distributed. That shows you that the temperatures are very low here, and this makes any outdoor environmental conditioning of that kind meaningless. The idea of, for instance, this heating and cooling is that not that you can sort of on January can stay outdoors, but rather in the intermediate, like in October or in March or April, where you have sometimes a few hours of few days of lower temperature, or in this high summer of very, like today, very hot. Now here, for instance, you have October, 2 o'clock, and you see that a lot of these figures fall into the comfort zone. So this means that only by a slight addition, for instance through infrared heating, you can push this few points up into the comfort zones, and you can still have outdoor life. Yeah. Now, this is the second slide didn't come here, but here, for instance, you see an example. You got the point anyway. Example of July 14. Here's again the comfort area. A number of points are rather near above, so through some cooling you can again create a comfortable outdoor environment. This shows you the this again a system which, as I told you, at certain points agglomerate, and through the system of agglomeration where lines run parallel, you can, besides the things I told you already, you can put in, for instance, the roofs, the sunshades. Here you see a spotlight. Here you see a watertight encased projector. Here you see a panel you can push, etc. Now here, for instance, you see how also the atmosphere is under such an area when you have the sunshades, or here you have the forum area. The red steps are the heated steps. Here you have what you don't see on the slides. You have a water curtain and like a Persian chadar, water running down from a fountain. Here you see the roll-down walls, for instance. Here, this is the amphitheater, the forum, and you can close it off by these walls if you want. Now here again you see one of this roll-down, the details of this roll-down walls. A speaker here, a jet here, This shows a plug-in point, the detail of a plug-in point, the detail of the light, the detail how this is attached to it. Here you see one of those panels for exhibition posters, etc. Here you see a detail you just pushed in. The whole thing is based on the three holes in this double metal connector, and then you can put in a gutter and above the fiberglass roof, for instance. And this shows you, for instance, an end of such a line. This shows you the orientation. This is the subway station. You see the red line leads into the center. From the center you have white, blue, orange, and green lines. Here you see, for instance, the orange line running into one of these housing areas. This is you see these agglomerations at the centers, and then in between just singular lines. Here you have this fountain I talked about, where you have within all this artificiality, you have a nature. This was a thing, and I show these two slides only because I was occupied with this idea for quite some time, and I always entered competitions. These were the competitions entries for the Ludwigshafen terminal, for the terminal square, for the railroad station square, and we didn't succeed there. But we continued to improve and made the calculations, etc. And another competition I won, and on which we worked the last years, is the this area in Vienna of the Rathausplatz, where I do not want to go into details, but where we again have a number of these features. In this case, because it's a completely different thing, like in terms of the buildings around and the cityscape and the spaces. You have this is the City Hall, the University, that's the Parliament, that's the National Theatre, this is the famous Ringstrasse. So it's approached differently, and you have singular points on which you can attach in certain areas things. This shows a night view. This shows, like for instance here, you can take out one of this and put in a heater, or here you have what we developed against the CO fumes of the cars. We have nothing than a simple strip which exhausts, which takes air from the inside of the park and creates a current which takes the foul air above about 10 meters above the public. So they have clearer air. The question of these public areas, of these pedestrian areas, of outdoor living spaces in the city has occupied me very much, as you see. And there's another project we did for the city of Vienna. They asked us to do for this area, and I don't want to go into the details of this. This area will be in 1984. It happened to be 1984 because it's the opening of the second subway line. Will be the most active area in the city, because there will two subway lines, one railroad line, the connection with the airport and the bus terminal all will meet there. And at peak hour, you have 10,000 people getting off from public transportation, 25,000 people changing, and out of this 10,000 people at peak hour, 7,000 moving by foot into the city. So the question was very clear that the pedestrian was the highest priority. We developed traffic solutions that, on the basis that pleasant and short ways for the pedestrian, and rather drive around a little more with your car. And here is the Wien River, which, and by law, and this cannot be changed, the main, I don't know how to call it in English, in England, the federal highway, number 1, it's like US 66 or so, has to run through here. And we put it above here and created a hall underneath. You see the river, and then it's covered here, and the highway above, and you have glass enclosed, a long glass enclosed building in which you can have a variety of activities in the winter, indoor playgrounds, kindergartens, activity areas for just the population around. Here you see the indoor playground or greenhouse function. And this is the light strip between the two sections of the highway. Another competition for Salzburg. I won a competition for the rearrangement of the Salzburg Cathedral, which was done by Santino Solari, but it was not carried out. It was supposed to be carried out for the 1,000-year celebration of the cathedral, and this will wait now probably for the 2,000-year celebration. But on the ground of this, I participated then in a competition, and this is quite an interesting phenomenon here, for the whole old part of Salzburg city, which some of you might know. And here's the castle on top of a hill, something like in Edinburgh. And underneath this hill, there are big excavations now, which take up all the cars. There are big garages now. So this makes it possible to clear the whole Salzburg from at least the central part from cars, and it will be a pedestrian area. We got the prize in this competition, and might do some parts of this area. Here again, a much more subtle approach was necessary. We would not put leader lines and big agglomerations of things in front of the cathedral and some of the other squares, but just very slight interventions, both spatially, both in terms of a sort of third horizontal facade, sort of sorting out the functions, like here, sort of sitting areas and little performance areas for the tourists. One of the problems of Salzburg is that they have many tourists, and the tourists want to have places where they can sit and have their lunch, for instance, because the restaurants are very expensive. So they already have to sit somewhere on the sidewalk. So things like this are created. For those who know, Salzburg is a very difficult square. There's this big cathedral and the old Gothic quarter here. it's actually quite an interesting thing. Salzburg, the archbishop who at that time ruled, he cleared half of the city, called Scamozzi, to make a new design for the cathedral, threw all the coffins of the former archbishops into the Salzach River, and on a complete tabula rasa, wanted to do and did also something new. Finally, it was not done by Scamozzi, but Solari and many other of these buildings here, the residence, etc. This is the area which is now so loved by the tourists and protected as national monument. And one would have to imagine what would have happened if you had a committee of national monuments, for instance, at that time. You never could have done it, the bishop. And you would still have some of the old dingy quarters here around. So this is a very difficult space to handle, but for those to know, this is Fischer from Erlach's University Church, and the space in front is traditionally for markets. So we put up very light, simple structures which you can, on market days, put up and then easily take down again and store here on the side. We have two more trays, but they are not full. You don't have to be afraid. They are only a few more slides left. I try now to concentrate, and also in a few slides you will see now, on certain realizations where I think I managed, and this I think is important, because I think this is a slow process. You cannot at once, maybe sometimes, like the Salzburg Archbishop, you can throw everything, all the old coffins into the river. But you can introduce certain things only by a step-by-step procedures, and I try to do this in the projects I can do, which I get through competitions or through some other happenstance to try to incorporate some of these thoughts. And again, the problem of, when I said that is the problem of continuous transformation of our cities, of buildings, I want to show one example which is in Munich. Those of you who know Munich, it has a very interesting urban layout, especially this classicist part. This, for instance, here are a succession of streets and squares all done by Leo von Klenze, the big rival of Schinkel, who also did, for instance, the Hermitage in Leningrad. And this is a building also done by Leo von Klenze. It originally was only that long and has been extended by him later, and it was his own house. And nice houses the architects had at that time. Huh? And it is now converted into the headquarters of the Siemens company, which is a German electronics concern. And again, which is quite interesting, that the original, on this axis, of which we will talk in a moment, this is this side, this facade is this facade you see here. This is the building. Originally, the main entrance was on this side, this building was bombed and destroyed and burned, and only parts of the facade stayed, so there was nothing in the interior left. And some years ago, they made a new entrance here and a big sort of stair, which at once also fell under the protection of the Committee of Preservation. It was only 15 years old. So it had to be kept, and which posed a problem. And it shows here, and I show you just some examples. You have this stair, and the only possibility that to put an elevator was here. And this is the entrance hall. And the problem was how to bring people in a hall where you have nothing except the reception to the elevator. Here you see the plan of this hall, and I took up, as I said, there's in the interior is nothing left, except of course that the arches you saw on the outside also reflect into the inside as spatial elements, and this motif was taken up, and this things you see here as bearing structure you cannot remove, and there was the condition for a revolving door, so this again suggested a circular shape and space, and well, here you have a reception, here the elevators, here two sitting areas, and I just show you how this looks. You have a sort of inverted canopy here at the entrance. This is the entrance desk. This is a screen which is influenced by a screen in one of the detached houses at the Katsura Palace, and it's made out of white marble and green quartzite. And you see the revolving door at the entrance. You see how you are led around this corner, also by the lines on the floor. The sitting area, the only work of art here, painting by Lembach of Werner von Siemens, who invented the electric dynamo, and on it, which was the breakthrough of electricity, and a very strong light well in front of the elevators. Some of the furniture, a table with a marble tablecloth, a chair slightly in the spirit of classicism, cover of the heating. Well, now this is the other front I talked about, which formerly was the entrance. There's a very strong and interesting axis, and I cleared this space and wanted to make an interior which would be part of the urban setting, that also the interior would take part of the whole urban setting you also saw in the bird's eye view before. And here you see this view from this room, and I made a big room there, and the biggest room of course is the boardroom, and then this is the boardroom, which is the interior is a continuation of the urban spaces, and on this axis. Here you see the end of the axis. These lines have a function here. They serve for acoustical reasons. Up here they are the air conditioning, house the air conditioning. The table, which is 8 meters long, which is 24 feet, rests on 4 legs for maximum flexibility. You can see here it's a kind of bridge structure. This is one of the waiting one of the waiting rooms, which, as I said before, it's very important also what mood, what atmosphere space has. And here I try to create a certain mood. In this case, it's not only a question of color and material, but it is very much, of course, one of it. This is wood. These are it's metal fabric which you use for paper production, filters, and then you have an artificial sky, cloud sky painted above. So you can wait here. This is one of the corridors. In such an old building, the corridors are always the biggest problem because they are dark and unpleasant, and especially this building had on the front it had 3 floors, and on the back it had 4 floors. So the higher floors are here and the lower floors are here, which is also expressed here in this door heights. Back here are all the air conditioning ducts and the electrical conduits, and here I created an artificial skylight. So it's a simulated daylight situation. Also the color of the light is precisely the spectrum of daylight, so that you have the feeling of a skylight here. And, well, this is, for instance, an entrance to the John, and that's how the John looks. It's all based on a 15 centimeter square or direction. This is one of the corridors which just sort of connect some of the other old buildings, and how you take up these irregularities of an old building, both in terms of plan and in terms of levels. These are some of the secretariats, and I developed a system based on the module of the lighting. And all these elements here are on this lighting fixture module, and the secretaries could choose whether they wanted color, which is actually formica covered panels, or whether they wanted natural wood. So, but it had to be on the system. It could be slightly modified, as you see, but it had to be on the system. So that's again a color version, and that's a natural wood version. This are they have various spaces for dining, both for the employees, for guests. They have a lot of guests. It's an international company. Both company people come from all over the world, and you want to have a chat, or you have a business lunch, or you have a state guest, because it's the biggest industry in Germany. You very often, if there's a state visit, they come to also to look at some of the factories or whatever. Yeah, probably a similar thing here. So the need was for a series of, in one instance, there you see some other examples, was for a series of dining rooms for about always 8 people. And I was confronted with the question, do I make all these dining rooms alike? Because in one way the program was clear, it's a table seating 8 people. Now I decided to try to make each room a different atmosphere, a different mood, so that whatever your spirit was, you could take a more sober room, or if you if an old friend comes back from Brasilia and has to tell a story, so you go into another room, or if you have to entertain the Shah, you go to a third room. And you have a corridor here, and you can see on the outside already sort of the inside of the room. This is, for instance, the Bavarian room, blue and white being the Bavarian colors. So that's for a hefty beer and then for instance, these are rooms made out of the same elements, and you could make different arrangements, and all you changed was either lighting and color of the panels, but it's exactly the same panels. So you can create completely different rooms with the same panel. The only change in fabrication is a different gel coat on the fiberglass. And this is a good example of how you can create variety in an industrial product, for instance. This is one of the finer areas. There you have your cigar, or you can have a coffee. This is a sitting area. Here again, this is an example I show very often. I wanted to have a warm light, but on the dishes, on the foot, I wanted to have a clear white light, that it is not falsified. So the vertical light which comes through gives a very clear light on the table, but this is a brass diffuser, and so the reflection is yellowish, and you get this warm atmosphere. And this is, for instance, for this all very small rooms, really. It only looks bigger because I cut through at 45 degrees, and you get a big marble wall on one side, and on the other side it's just plaster. And again, sort of air conditioning is an integral part, as you have seen in most of the other projects, of the whole space, of the whole shape of the room. And it is sort of up and down of the ceiling is not just accidental, but you have to have the ducts here for the crossing of the ducts of the air conditioning, etc. Well, this is another of those spaces. This is a kind of paraphrase, a kind of quotation of the Loos bar in Vienna. Ron has mentioned before, extending a space by mirrors which are above eye level. These are some of the larger dining rooms. Again, here a quotation from Otto Wagner. And I'm now through in a second. This is again a problem here, and which was similar to the one you saw before. Old and new, converting something old into new function, adding new function. This is a famous painting by Bernardo Bellotto of Nymphenburg Castle, Nymphenburg Palace, and it still looks the same today. And the big feature is this big wall. There's minor palaces and there's a major palace here which you don't see. And this dominating wall had to be kept, and every new construction had to be invisible behind this wall. So this is a scientific foundation in Munich. From the outside it looks like this. From the inside you have squeezed underneath the line, the cornice line of the wall. You have various spaces where the main purpose, for instance, of this room, which is called a club room, which is really not a club, is for They have lectures of top scientists, Nobel Prize winners and so on. And then after this they have a discussion, a normal discussion, after the lecture. But because they come from all over the country or even from other countries for such a lecture, they have after discussions which go on way after midnight. So then they sit down here and continue to discuss sort of particularities which of high-powered science. I happened to sit in a discussion with Werner Heisenberg, for instance. I don't pretend I understood very much. And again here, this is a steel structure turned under 45 degrees to accommodate the sweep of this wall. All the lighting and air conditioning, etc., integrated in this. You have this, well, you don't see it really, stops here. You have air conditioning light in these lines which run through here. You have modules of triangular sets of which you can combine different tables, etc. And this is a sort of more sort of high class, and this is a job I had which was quite interesting. It's the press and cultural section of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and it's in an old Stalinist. This is the embassy. It's an old Stalinist building, and I was called in to give them better living conditions because the living conditions looked like this. And this is the area the only area where Russians come into. Most the other areas are closed, only for the Americans. But here America meets Russia. They come and listen to records or video lectures and things like that. So this was the state before, and we had very little means. We had to use old furniture, and so we took this approach. Because they will build a new embassy in the near future. Only the near future is always sort of a few years ahead. There's always a cooling down of relations, so they postpone the construction of the new embassy. And the people still live in these conditions. So we did this, and here you see with very simple measures, like this is the video room. We just put in this red sort of tent and put acoustic tiles behind it. But, I show this just as a sort of contrast to like the Siemens thing, which of course is, because it's the headquarters of a company of 350,000 people, company has a different sort of wants to project something different. Here we had to make do with very little means, and it's really the same thing. And also, like what one of the jobs I'm working on right now is miners' housing in the Ruhr, in Recklinghausen. There's miners' housing of the 20s and 1910 and 20s, and they want to know what to do with it. To tear it down or build something new. We are going not to tear down. I'll show this just as a comment. This is a prefabricated housing project I did, but I don't want to go now into this. Sorry. So this is how these houses look, and we think they look rather pleasant, and we do not want to tear anything down there. and people, they have their rabbits, and they breed carrier pigeons, which is a famous pastime of Ruhr miners, most of them coming from Poland, and coming from Poland 50 years, having come from Poland 50 years ago. Not to be mistaken for the Turks, which have just moved in. There are big antagonisms here between the earlier settlers and the later settlers. But anyway, it's again a problem of just a few interventions to build in a new bathroom, or sometimes they don't even have a toilet and things like that, but leave some of these very pleasant aspects just untouched. I close now with a very few rundown through some pictures of a third aspect I talked about in Folkestone, and that is exhibitions. Exhibitions to me has been always a ground of experimentation, of trying to sort of a field for trying out things, because it's impermanent, and it has a different spirit. You can do more. Regulations are sometimes less severe. I do an exhibition now in New York where regulations are very severe. But anyway, and I do not want to really go into this very much. And a mass product of Austria, snow. So you walk through an artificial blizzard. Or you had a product there which you could carry, you could take with you, and you could carry with you or put on your face, which is where glasses, but you couldn't put in your pocket, so it served as an extension of the exhibition. You could wear it or carry it or throw it away. Each of these options we liked, but you couldn't put it in your pocket and hide it. So you had this red, white, red, which are the Austrian colors, glasses all over. This is an exhibition on paper, on which I showed the duality and ambivalence of paper. Paper good or bad, like burning paper, that paper burns, it good is good and bad, and that it rottens is good and bad. And sort of it was this duality, this ambivalence was shown by this dividing line, and you had on each side always one aspect, old and new, and past and present, and raw product and end product, or pre-paper time or pre-paper products and post-paper products. Like for instance here, a plate, china plate extends, and this is a glass wall in between, extends into the paper plate, or real grass goes over into artificial paper grass. And at certain points you could, you had paper walls which you could deflorate and sort of walk through. Or just sort of what you can do with the folding of a piece of paper, you can make a sacred object out of it. This is another exhibition. I'm very brief, so the idea is somewhat clear. It's an exhibition called Death. It's an artificial, here this part, an artificial archaeological site in which you could dig and find things. And there are things also and you could put into showcases. And you had wrongly identified, like an archaeologist, if you would find this, we call this the tomb of the warrior. Sort of this wrongly identified object. And that's an exhibition which is really sort of in the realm of pure art, or how you will call it. It's an exhibition I did on the Biennale in Venice in 1972 called Life and Death, Everyday Situations. And this is a room with common objects and everyday situations. You have a car, and you have a bed and a table, and you come and go. You come by boat in Venice, so this is the boat, and this is your car, and this is your altar. Okay, that's it. Any questions?